90-second question. How will you challenge Representative Kagan concerning his record on jobs and the stimulus?
I'd like to quote from the Rhinelander publication that just came out last week, well, actually in late August. Quote, "I pulled our economy back from the abyss. We were headed toward the Great Depression." That's what my general opponent put out there in the press. As chair of economic development for 6 years, and as someone who has taught foreign policy out of this country and based it on economics, I can tell you there's no sound principles in short-term jobs, public sector jobs. We need three things, which is how we turn the state economy around in 05 and 06 to spike job growth. We need business regulation reform so that the bureaucracy isn't encumbering agriculture and manufacturing businesses out of the state. We need tax reform. A flat tax would do, although I'd be open to taking a look at the consumption tax. We need to make sure that manufacturing and agriculture in Northeast Wisconsin stays strong. I have a background in doing that. We need to focus on that in Washington because when we don't have gross domestic product, we don't have an economy that's viable.
So how will I challenge Steve Kagan on this? Well, let's see. In February of 2009, the Democrats passed an $850 billion stimulus bill to do what? To create jobs and to keep our unemployment rate at below 8%. And what happened? Didn't create any jobs, and our unemployment rate went into double digits. It didn't work. And you would think they would learn from their mistakes, but I'm here to tell you, President Barack Obama was in our state. He's advocating for more stimulus. What failed in the past failed in their minds because they didn't spend enough. And that's what I'm going to offer in clear distinctions. You want to get this economy turned around. Again, government doesn't create jobs, it just creates debt. We've seen that over the last 2 years. We've got to create an atmosphere by which small business can thrive and flourish. And you do that by giving them the confidence they need with proper tax policy and environmental policy so they know what ground they stand on. I've got all the faith and confidence in our small businesses here in Northeast Wisconsin. We just have to let them get out there and get off their backs.
This is not a particularly difficult task. Congressman Kagan brought $300 million to our district and created 265 jobs. It's a little over $1 million per job. Last year my company created 7 new jobs. It didn't cost the taxpayer a penny. It's not a particularly difficult task creating jobs if you have a product to sell and you're good enough to sell it. The problem is that the government has a bill of goods to sell and they want to cram it down your throat. And the reality is stimulus will not work. It does not work and it cannot work. And if you take jobs from one sector of the economy, or you take money from one sector of the economy and redistribute it to another sector, this sector loses their jobs and this sector gains it, and the government shrugs their shoulders. I've said this before, it's like the Army sergeant lining his entire platoon up and said, "I've got great news for you today. You all get new underwear. You give yours to you, you give yours to you, and you give yours to you." This is exactly what stimulus is. It's why it doesn't work. And it cannot work. It failed in the 1930s, it failed in 2010, and it will continue to fail. And I think that the best answer for this whole question is to simply ask Congressman Kagan to explain himself why when he took office at the end of 2006, we have 97% employment in Wisconsin, and by the end of 2009, we had 10% unemployment. I mean, we know what the results were of the policies that they passed. They didn't work. And so I appreciate that softball question. Thank you.
We're going to move on to health care. And so I'm going to start with Roger. I think that's the order. Bob, you keeping me current? This is a 90-second question. How does your position on the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare, differ from Representative Kagan? And how will you point that out in your campaign?
Well, I think it's pretty clear. Representative Kagan voted for Obamacare, and I would not have done so. When you look at what Obamacare did, the whole premise is we're going to try and make health care more affordable here for American citizens. What does Obamacare do? We're going to see rates go up 13% by 2016. Now, if we were to go out there and pass a reform package that actually was patient-driven, patient-centered, something that had transparency in premiums and services, something that had medical malpractice reform, which is completely non-existent in Obamacare. And if we allowed insurance companies to compete across state lines, the Congressional Budget Office said a plan like that would reduce premiums by 2016 7 to 10%. So the difference between Steve Kagan and myself is he voted for a 23% difference. He wanted to increase premiums. I wanted to keep government out of the way between a patient and their doctor. I would have voted to allow the free market to do its course, allow competition and choice out there, which would have brought a reduction of 10% in health care. This is a very big issue, probably one of the biggest issues that are going to promulgate this campaign. And people have to know that when the chips were on the table, Congressman Steve Kagan voted for yet more government. And I won't do that. I will put my faith and trust in the American people.
I think there's a core philosophical difference that we have as Republicans versus the Democrats. And that is that they look every single time to government for a solution. And I think we ought to be looking every single time for the private sector for those solutions. And if we do that, we'll find solutions that actually work. For example, the President talked about bending the cost curve down, and when I talk about President Obama or Steve Kagan or Nancy Pelosi, we'll talk pretty much all of them the same. But he talked about bending the cost curve down. But what they really attacked, rather than the C-word cost, they attacked the C-word coverage. And they approached this from the coverage side, added 31 million new insured people into the system, but didn't address supply at all. So you shove up demand, you don't address supply. Laws of supply and demand will necessarily force prices up. They have to go up. There is no other solution. They must go up. What they should have done is address the cost side by looking at other factors. Possibly, allowing, as Roger mentioned, allowing people to shop across state lines, addressing tort reform. Those both would have driven costs down. Most significantly, their plan couples the relationship between employer and employee, and they should have decoupled it. They forced that relationship more together. We don't ask employers to purchase homeowners insurance or car insurance. We shouldn't be asking them to purchase health insurance because it causes our society to be less healthy. And I believe that when people are responsible for their own health care, their own relationship with their doctor, we will have a healthier country. And a healthier country will have a system that is less expensive.
Now, I'll say thank you for the softball question. I was chair of the subcommittee on health care, saving those $25 million. And to answer the question on Obamacare, I did offer something else at the request of leadership in Washington. They said they had no ideas on the table, and Terry, we need Republican ideas. So on May 14th, 2010, Fox Business News published some of my ideas. And they have to do with competitive bids. They have to do with getting out of the way and not allowing the government to take over your choices. Letting the private sector work so that there's transparency, and of the utmost concern was that Obamacare did nothing to do with costs, had nothing to do with quality, had nothing to do with the free market solutions that we know are a part and parcel of why the Fox Cities has a good quality healthcare system. Now, I write about the 5 points. I'm not going to school you on that. I'll just ask you to think about one thing. Would you rather have government in control, Steve Kagan, who bragged about being the author of the Obamacare on tape, the individual who my leadership in Washington told me was arm-twisting on the floor of the United States House in order to drive that bill through before it even was on paper? Or would you want someone who's already led ideas that have been embraced by Fox Business News and 285 other business and medical journals? I'm listening, and I'm ready to write the solutions we need to put you in charge and to make sure that your doctor and you have that sacred relationship again, not insurance companies, and certainly not the government to take your choices away.
We have a 30-second question. How do we repeal Obamacare while President Obama is still in the White House? Read?
You don't. I suppose it's possible if we would have a supermajority in the Senate, but you have to have the ability to override a veto. And so I think right now I believe it's a little counterproductive. I believe that the bill ought to be repealed. I think we shouldn't be spending a year and a half of hard time fixing that bill, possibly defunding the bill, while we wrestle with the President on whether it should be repealed or not. We don't have the time. The American people need solutions not in a year from now. They need them right away.
Most of us who have studied, taught, and been in some type of role in leadership in the legislature understand that there's 3 branches of government. That's why we have a challenge to the United States Supreme Court, because the so-called health care reform bill has violated 60% of your Bill of Rights. That's why it was endorsed by philosophical idea groups across the country who want me to go in and make sure that those challenges have feet. Not only can you have a supermajority, but I'm going to be counting on the judicial branch to do the right thing, and I'll be doing the research, which is why I'm already engaged in repealing Obamacare through the judicial branch.
The last chapter has not yet been written on health care. And it's going to go down like this. We have 20 states' attorneys generals who are challenging some constitutional aspects of it. I think that's probably going to be once it reaches the Supreme Court, we're going to see some opinions that we readily accept. The second is we can defund it in Congress, but the third is, even though the President is going to veto when we repeal it, it is very important that we repeal Obamacare in this next session, and I'll tell you why. We're going to pass a reform package. In 2012 is going to be election to the American people. Where do you want us to go on health care? Obamacare or the direction we have? If we can't repeal Obamacare knowing the President's going to veto it, I'm telling you, no one's going to have the faith that we can do it with the President who would sign it.
All right, the next question is 90 seconds, and we'll begin with